Welcome back, everybody, to the Inside Texas Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Evan Veith, as always, joined by Keenan Womack next to me. And we just keep switching places where we're at, Keenan. It's office, it's home, it's back in DC for me right now. You can see I had the hoop dream since day one, that broken rim from all the times I used to dunk. Speaking of people who like to dunk, that's what we're going for with this transition. There's not been a ton of news with Texas basketball this week, but luckily for us, a lot happened on Tuesday with John Rothstein, who's favorite sicko of college basketball, tweeting at the most inappropriate times, talking about basketball. But this time he's talking about Texas basketball and Lucina Traore, who, if you remember, was one of the transfers that Texas got brought over from Xavier, except he's not gotten a chance to play a minute at Xavier because at Long Beach State, he was a really good player, really good kind of back to the basket, forward center combo, really good rebounder, but was injured pretty quickly into his time at Xavier. Didn't get a chance to play an actual game, had a practice injury. But from what Rothstein says, it sounds like it's all hands on deck with Traore and he was medically cleared to go. What have you heard about this and what's there to know about this Texas front court here?
Yeah, so I spoke to a source within the program today, and he said he wasn't sure on the exact timeline, but things are progressing. So that's what I was told today. That's why I didn't quote use a program source in particular for this one, because they said they were going to wait a little bit before they announced anything. But yeah, seemingly all things are looking good for Lucina Traore. Very important player for this front court, right? He might not start. You might. It's likely Dalen Swain's going to start at the 4 and Vokia Titus is going to start at the 5. That's what I think will happen. But Traore is going to be a guy that's probably going to get starter level minutes. Big body, 6'10", 245. Really, really good 2 seasons at Long Beach State before he ended up transferring to Xavier, right? He played 2 years there. He played 1 year at St. Louis where he didn't play much. Transferred out to play for The Beach, which is a hilarious mascot name. They're The Beach. He was an 11-10 guy there, night in, night out. Really impressive rebounder, physically imposing guy that can bang on the boards. Very, like I said, very physical player. A guy that Texas could have really used last year, I think, would have been super important for them last year. And considering, they were 11th in the conference in offensive rebounds, they were 9th in total rebounds. So they were a team that really could have used kind of boost on the interior, and that's what they're going to get with Traore. And he kind of points to a shift of focus for this Texas roster versus last year, which was very much focused on the perimeter. And Sean Miller is a guy that is focusing on the interior, right? He's going after guys that can rebound, that can score in the paint, that can finish plays, that can protect the rim, that can be deterrents at the rim. And, Traore never was a big-time shot blocker as far as numbers go. I think he averaged something like, half block a game, maybe 0.8 blocks per game. But still a guy that can be a deterrent and can make people think twice before driving to the rim. Even if he doesn't start, he's going to be a guy that gets probably at least 20 minutes a game this year.
Yeah, and I think that physically imposing term is, you bold that, you underline it, because like you mentioned a little bit, that's what this team lacked last year. They were not ready for the SEC style of play, the way that these teams are constructed, because if you remember, Caden Shedrick and Zira Kanyama, whether it was because of their pure vertical height, because Texas really didn't have a close to 7-foot player, even close to 6'11" on their team. They also just weren't the strongest players. Onyema was a bit of a bully down low, but it was erratic. It was wild what he did when he got the basketball down low or coming off of rebounds. And Traore brings a true bruiser type that Texas hasn't had. Even with, Dylan DC wasn't quite that player. I wouldn't say any of the Bishop Mitchell archetypes were. Maybe since some of these guys who are in the NBA, you're talking about a true physically dominant center. Yeah. And like you said, it's hard to really project where a guy who hasn't played in over a year can start on a team like this, especially when modern NBA, you maybe don't want 2 non-shooters at the 4 and 5. That's sort of what you get with Swain, but Swain can impact the offense a little bit spacing-wise without taking a 3-point shot. But Traore, Vokia Titus seems to be a really good center duo. How much better do you think it is compared to Shedrick, Onyema, and what Texas had last year?
Yeah, I think it's definitely an improvement. I really am a big Dalen Swain believer, and I'm a guy that writes about the NBA draft on my other beats. So I'm pretty plugged into talking to guys who are scouts, guys who do this for a living and look for players. And almost everybody has Dalen Swain as a first-round draft pick next year, right? Because of the ability to, like you said, he's not an elite shooter, but he is a guy that can attack the basket. And if he gets that 3-point percentage up a little bit, if they do play 4 out or they play him on the perimeter at any point, he's a guy that can attack closeouts because he has a solid handle considering he's a 6'8" forward, right? Vokietitis is another guy, super productive in his minutes at Florida Atlantic. I just think, and then you talk about also the guys that they're bringing in out of the high school ranks. John Clark is a guy. Nick Cody didn't play a ton last year, was dealing with some injuries, but he had a 20-point game against Arkansas Pine Bluff, I believe. It was an early game of the season. Yeah, he had 20 points. So, Arkansas Pine Bluff isn't an SEC level caliber team, but it is a college team, and it's a team that Nick Cody was able to show that he can play offense against. So I think they're really solid in the front court, and I think it's really important in the SEC this year, especially when you look at this year's SEC versus last year's SEC. I think last year's SEC was stronger in the front court than this year's. Now, the back courts in the SEC this year look insanely talented.
Mm-hmm.
You look at Florida, you look at Alabama, you look at Auburn, you look at all these teams, Kentucky, but there isn't a front court but outside of Florida, really, that looks completely dominant, that has a Janai Broom, for example. So I think that's an area where Texas can really compete, is in this front court unit. You have guys like, I don't know. Again, I always go back to Florida's front, their center.
It's hard to not talk about them.
Yeah, that team's going to be preseason number 1 likely. But, a lot of their toughest matchups are going to come before SEC play starts, right? They open the season against Duke. Duke is going to have guys in that front court. Cam Boozer, who's a guy, is Carlos Boozer's son, who's a guy who I think could be the number 1 pick in the draft next year, possibly, depending on the kind of season he has. He's kind of a Paolo Banchero type, just big-bodied forward. But it's going to be a great test for Texas to jump in there, play against Patton Gongba, who's another big center for Duke, guy who came off the bench, kind of backed up Kaman Malawach last year. So, it's going to be really, really interesting to see how this front court plays against these big challenges, because if they can play well in the front court, they can compete in the SEC. Now, I'm not saying they're going to win the SEC in their Sean Miller's first year or anything like that, but they will certainly be higher than they were last year, which is, I believe, they finished 13th in the conference. So I'm looking for a much better performance, not just out of the front court, but out of the team in general, due to the fact that the front court is so talented this year.
And last year, for Texas, identity speaking, either wasn't that they had one, or it was Trey Johnson go score, which, by the way, haven't touched on it. Trey Johnson to the Washington Wizards.
Congratulations, brother.
Very, very happy. You can see me in the threads getting a little excited.
Jersey? Can you get a jersey?
We'll see if I can afford a jersey. A Wizards jersey is a poor investment, just generally. So we'll see about that. But it would go triple platinum at man, I can't go to a frat party anymore.
You're a little too old for that, but that would have been a big banger at the old Greek houses, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, but outside of just letting Johnson score and finding ways to get him or Mark to get some space going towards the basket, maybe step back for a 3 or kick it out, there wasn't a way that Texas won their games solidly, game in and game out. And I think that's what's going to be different about this team this year. Like you mentioned with Vokietitis, that guy's a legit starter who wasn't playing full legit starter minutes at FAU, but he's going to be the shot blocker. He's 7'1", I want to say is his height, around that area. It's not one of these 6'9" centers. He's going to be a presence in the paint. Now, he might have a little bit of that Chet Holmgren problem where he's a little too skinny, but still saw Holmgren having a dominant game to finish the series in Oklahoma City.
Mm-hmm.
And him matched with Traore, you can do 2 big lineups where the rebounding is really well synergized. You can have one of them with Swain, and it's a little smaller. You can go even smaller than that. And I like that you mentioned Cody and Clark, because those are 2 players that will actually play this year. I think Cody's going to have a real role as an 8th, 9th man. Clark, you're at least going to see in the preseason or early season, pre-SEC gameplay. And then you still have Luis Orbiora, who's going to be a redshirt kind of guy, that 7'1" center from Great Britain, one of those international prospects that Texas has. But I'm going down the line, and that's 5 big men that's on this Texas team. And last year it was 3.5, 4. You saw Jamie Vincent a little bit, but there's more bodies, and there's more bodies who are actually impactful. And that's a big difference for this Texas team.
Yeah, no doubt, man. And they're just going to be a team that plays inside out, and that's totally fine. I think that works in the SEC. Now, looking at the way Sean Miller kind of runs his offense is it's freeze, threes, and bucket shots. Like that's the look. They're not trying to shoot a bunch of mid-range shots. It's not really their game. So you have guys that can score in the interior. That opens things up for the guys on the perimeter, right? And if you have guards that want to attack the basket, for example, maybe Jordan Pope gets into more of a mode where he's attacking the basket this year instead of kind of taking step backs, taking mid-range shots.
Yeah, those long
And
twos.
yeah, exactly. And if he does that, you have guys who can rebound those misses if there are misses. And I mean, there will be, obviously. It's college basketball, and he's 6'2", but
0
you have
misses all
guys,
year.
yeah, 100% finishing rate.
Perfect team.
Yeah, they're not going to miss a shot the whole season. That's my bold prediction. But if they can have guys in the front court that can rebound, I mean, that's second chance opportunities. That's just more possessions for your team, and that's a big opportunity for this team to get extra points in the paint and make things easier on the backcourt.
Yeah, and I do agree with you that you're taking a team that probably had the worst front court last year in the SEC. Maybe you don't go that far. I mean, you're looking at some of the other teams that played poorly, but this Texas team was 14th or 13th, wherever they were seated in the SEC for a reason last season. And it did feel like a lot of that was because of that inability to score with the front court players. Caden Shedrick, as much as he gave multiple years to this team, that wasn't his ability, was to score. So what I'm really looking forward for with Traore is if he's healthy, can he bring in some of that small post ability to get into a spot and get a hook shot in, which I don't think you saw Caden Shedrick score more than 5 hook shots or anything of that nature last season. So where's the scoring going to come from the front court is my main question. Then obviously health for Traore. But are there any lingering thoughts or questions that you have for what this front court could be going next year? Because even with all the positives, there's still things to question heading into the season.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, there's you got a young guy in Voki Titus. He's played 1 year of college basketball. You got a guy who's coming off of not playing for a year in Traore. And then Swain is a guy that I think is a combo forward. I think he could possibly play some minutes at the 3 as well. But again, he's not a shooter. So you're going to have to figure out lineups where you have guys who can shoot the basketball. But man, I just have much higher hopes for this front court than I did going into last season and looking at that unit. And I think this is just a much better unit that I think can compete at an SEC level.
Yeah, and of course the ceiling is just raised when that happens. At the very worst, like you said, some of the problems may come up that Voki Titus being spooked out a little bit in the SEC or Traore not being 100%, but that's what happens. You bring these kind of players and raise the ceiling. Someone who can help you with ceilings and overall your home is Laura Baker. Do you want to throw it that way, Connor?
Hi, I want to tell you about Laura Baker. If you're looking for a new home in the 512 or even at this point, let's face it, 737 area code, there's only one number to call. That's Laura Baker at 512-784-0505. As a member of the elite Andy Allen team with Keller Williams, Laura has helped Longhorns find the home of their dreams in Central Texas. Just ask our resident sex symbol, Ian Boyd, who moved all the way from Michigan to Texas with Laura's help. Laura can help you find what you're looking for in the 512, the 737, or even parts of the 254 and the 210. Just, give her a call at 512-784-0505. Her email is in the description as well as the rest of her contact details. She's a friend. Give her a
So Texas this week, outside of the news of Traore and obviously Trey Johnson, congratulations to him, getting drafted top 10 in the NBA draft, 6 overall, has added a few offers to this 26 or 27 class as well. But mostly 26 is what you're looking at with some Texas guys. I believe it was about 8 that came in, but a lot of names. Darius Wobbington is quite a name. Arafon Diane is someone I know you're familiar with. Some of the Texas guys include Beckham Black from Duncanville, Reese Alston, Dawson Batty. Who are some of these guys that we really should know about and should get to know in this process? Because I know a lot of our listeners aren't as familiar with the college basketball recruiting process, what goes on behind the scenes, how Texas brings these players in, and how big these classes are going to be for Sean Miller. So maybe pick one of these guys to talk about a little bit and also what the overall strategy might be for Miller here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting guys to talk about, Beckham Black and Reese Alston, they're both NBA legacies, right? So Beckham Black, brother of Anthony Black, big time Orlando Magic guard, played for Arkansas, was part of that Arkansas team that had one of the greatest recruiting classes we've ever seen, and then just got injured and ended up, I think they made it to the Sweet 16. It was really unfortunate because that team was extremely talented. I think it was Anthony Black, Nick Smith Jr., Jordan Walsh, and then a couple of other guys. So super talented group there. But another Duncanville kid. Now, he doesn't have the height that Anthony Black had. Anthony Black was 6'7" coming out of college or coming out of high school. I believe Beckham's about 6'3", depending on who you ask. He's about 6'3", though. He could grow. He's a class of 2027 guy, right? So he has a couple of years to grow. Maybe he ends up being 6'6" or something like that. But super talented, great, highly coordinated guard, amazing handle, dog mentality. I know that that's not great scouting work, but just really aggressive with the basketball and really aggressive on defense. Anthony Black is a guy that was known for his defensive upside, and Beckham Black is as well. He's a defensive playmaker. He's not quite, he doesn't have the size that Anthony has, so he's not quite as well thought of as a defender, but he has the same mentality as far as just getting after the ball handler, being a swarmer. And then Reese Alston is Rafer Alston's son. Second Baptist.
Ask if that's Rafer Alston.
Yeah. So he's grown a couple of inches. I believe he's 6'2", 6'3" now. Super quick, like hyper explosive type of guard, like just beats people off the dribble easily, gets to the rim, scores that way. He's a real lead guard prospect. He's a guy that can play point guard at the collegiate level, will likely be an NBA player. I don't know enough about him I haven't watched him in person, so I can't really say if I think he's like a first round talent or anything yet, but he's a guy that's rapidly climbing up draft board or high school ranks, and he's going to be a guy that will probably end up as a 5-star. I believe he's a 4-star right now on 3. So he's a guy that's going to end up being a very, very sought after type of talent. And he's at Second Baptist in Houston right now. And then Dawson Batty is a guy, St. Mark's kid from Dallas, 6'8", small forward. He's a class of 2027 guy. He's a guy that I think is going to be a 5-star. Really talented defensive type of wing, maybe combo forward, depending on if he grows anymore. And he's now the kind of comes from the line of guys from St. Mark's. If you remember Harrison Ingram, who was a 5-star who came from St. Mark's a few years ago and went to North Carolina. I believe he may have transferred somewhere else.
There, yeah.
I think he played for North Carolina, and then he went to the NBA. I don't know if he's still in the league or whatever, but yeah, I mean, that Dallas area, and I've talked about it before, Beckham and Dawson are both Dallas guys, and that Dallas area, the Dallas AAU is like truly unbelievable level of talent. I mean, there's a guy who just got signed out of the G League to the New York Knicks, Dink Pate, who is a kind of a family friend of mine. And he's another Dallas kid, played for Pinkston, played for G League Ignite. So the Dallas area and the Houston area as well are both just like absolutely freakishly loaded with NBA level talent. So if the Longhorns really want to establish themselves in the SEC, they need to plant a flag in the Dallas area. And then getting Trey Johnson was, I think, a big sign that they may be able to do that. Now it's a new staff and a new group of people who's running the program now, but it's vital for Texas to get those guys from the Dallas area because, in the past, Texas Tech and Baylor and schools like that have traditionally done better out of that area. Even Kentucky and Kansas going in and poaching guys from that area. Cason Wallace was a guy Texas wanted. He ended up going to Kentucky. Keontae George was a guy they wanted. He ends up going to Baylor. Anthony Black's a guy they want. He ends up going to Arkansas. There's so many examples of this like highly talented Dallas and Houston guys that end up going elsewhere, going to LSU or whatever. So really, really vital that Sean Miller, and I think Sean Miller understands that. I think that's why he's offering these guys as sophomores in high school and just really getting his brand on the radar. And I think the next year in the SEC, if depending on how they play, could really impact the way that they're viewed as a program, especially in the Dallas area.
Yeah, I think Houston's going to be hard as Houston, the school, is continuing to put more into
good point. Very good point.
They've been going from a team the last 5 years that was building up with strong 3-star level players, keep them in the program, get them on their schedule and their routine. But now this class this last year with Sanak and Flemings, I mean, they're going all in right there with recruiting. They understand their niche. So Dallas is just a gold mine for sports in general right now, but especially basketball is where Texas has to be able to win there. Like you said, Baylor's the number one school I think about when it's like getting Central Texas and more Northern Texas kids.
Yep.
Like that's the team you got to compete with. And of course, Miller's staff, you're starting to see a bit of a trend of how he's going about things because we're starting with this team he has now, centers, a lot of forwards, a lot of really good play up front. But then as we've been looking at recruiting for the past 2-3 shows we've done, the last show we talked about recruiting was a lot of wings, talking about guys who, a player who we eventually don't get goes to VCU, but talking about him going after these NBA built type players, 6'8", long wingspan, 3-and-D, get you on the outside, be an impact player for multiple years at the school. Now you're seeing, hey, Texas needs point guards, and they need point guards bad long term. Now 2027 is even more long term than what we're probably talking about with them needing someone next year and the year after that. But going into Duncanville and talking to player and offering them early is exactly what Texas needs to do. They're going to have to make up for them not being a great team at the start of Sean Miller's kind of reign here. But as NIL gets better, as he wins more games, these offers are going to look even more enticing as these kids get to their actual decision dates and their national signing dates. So you have to start those early because you don't want Houston sweeping in the way that maybe Texas football does with other schools in the SEC. But when you're looking at how Miller's recruiting and what his tactics are generally right now, do you see a path to Texas being one of the better recruiting schools in the SEC at this point? How long would that take to set up? Or is it maybe he's going to go the way of a mid-major coach where it's prioritizing transfers and maybe some of these 3-star lower level recruiting? Where do you see him attacking more?
I think that they will become a powerhouse with recruiting. I mean, Rick Barnes was able to do it. Shaka Smart was able to do it with one of the worst programs I've ever seen. I mean, it was unbelievable how bad those teams were, and he was still getting 5 stars in there. So I think the name recognition is going to be enough to pull certain guys. Obviously, going after those 4 stars is important, though. You need guys who play a couple of years. And now with the advent of real big baller NIL, I mean, I was talking about this during the NBA draft. There were about 20 guys who probably would have gone in the NBA draft that went back to school. First rounders, Yaxel Lendeborg, first rounder, JT Toppin, first rounder, LeBaron Filan, first rounder. Those are guys that went back to college. So I think it's really important that you bring in guys that maybe aren't the Cooper Flags and the Trey Johnsons of the world, that aren't going to play 1 year and be National Player of the Year or SEC Freshman of the Year and go pro immediately. So, yeah, I mean, I think you got to get a good mix in there. I don't know. I mean, I think Sean really wants to prioritize going after high school players, though. You know, I don't think he wants to make a living off the transfer portal. I think you supplement with the portal. I think he's probably doing the Sark method. You recruit out of high school, supplement with the portal. I think that's ideally what he wants to do going forward. Now, this year is a different example because he wasn't recruiting guys to Texas out of high school. So obviously you're going to have a situation where there's some transfers involved, you know, Dalen Swain, Lucina Traore, Matas Fokiatitis, Simeon Wilcher. Like, there's going to be guys who transfer in, but overall, I really think this is a program he wants to build out of the high school ranks, and I think that that's a way easier thing to game plan for in terms of like building a roster, because you're not bringing in guys who haven't, like, your sophomores will have played a year together, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I think that the future is very bright as far as recruiting goes. And I trust Sean Miller. I think he was doing a really good job at Arizona. He did a good job at Xavier. He's really done a good job everywhere he's been. And part of that is the fact that he's so willing to adapt what he's good at. He's willing to delegate. He brought in a guy like Adam Cohen, who's an elite recruiter as well. So I really like their odds going forward as it was some of these recruits. I mean, they're offering big time players, especially on the West Coast. A couple of these new offers were Arizona guys. He's using those advantages, using those connections to his advantage as well. So I like where the future is.
Yeah, you still see some of these late Barnes and Shaka players in the NBA that were these 4 or 5 recruits. They're all centers, of course, but you still see how Texas was able to do that in the middle of the 2010s, and that's pre-NIL, and how settlement works, and how, you know, the new news about Texas One Fund, which our very own Joe Cook did a great job summarizing today on our boards. It's going to be in favor of Texas going forward, theoretically, at least, for the more sports that they're playing and the more sports that they're elite in. And this town needs basketball to be good here. And unfortunately, no WNBA team, which I thought they maybe would be one of those teams that grabbed that bid, but Detroit's one of them. I think that's going to do it for us today, Keenan. A little bit of a shorter show, but not a ton of news from the Texas front. Obviously, Johnson to the Wizards got me happy, but I think that's going to do it for us over at Inside Texas. Thank you all for watching. As always, go over to the Inside Texas boards for the best basketball, baseball, football recruiting this week. July 4th in Texas football is always a problem. So make sure you're keeping up with everything going on there if you're interested in any of those topics. It's one of the cheapest but best subscriptions you can get on your feed on that credit card. Have a good one, y'all. Thanks for watching. We'll be out of here.